Hello noble ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking. What is the oldest human language ever created, or that at least we can trace historically? When it comes to proper numbers, academics are aware of more than 7,100 languages today. Now, given at least 40% would be considered endangered, and probably that number pales in comparison to the actual full number of all the different languages that the human species in the entirety of the globe has ever developed, which of course connects to another type of language which is very relevant to today's topic: dead languages. Obviously, most people that think of a dead language imagine a language that isn't spoken anymore, but that's not a very good definition, and in fact I'd like to clear that before we dive deeper into the topic. A dead language from Oxford Languages is a language which is no longer in everyday spoken use, such as Latin. Now, this as well is one of the reasons why we have this idea, well, if it's a dead language, it means it's no longer in everyday spoken use. But by whom is really the definitional criterion that we should focus on. Because the reality is, here there are no connection to any numbers nor statistics, which means already this could be incorrect. There are at least 14,000 speakers of Latin to this day that can speak it fluently and tend to use it, maybe not every day, but in several contexts, and in fact could use it every day, and sometimes they do. Let's see what kind of definition we get instead from Cambridge Dictionary. A language that is no longer spoken by anyone as their main language. Okay, now we are getting to something. And now we have the example: Latin is a dead language. Personally, not only I like this definition a lot more because it's more specific, and in fact, whenever we have a definition, what it does is it allows us to neatly place concepts, whether it be abstract or tangible, into neat categories for analysis and categorization. Now, the previous one, it was not a great work, but this one already much better. We can see how Latin, even if it's used by these 14,000 people that I just mentioned, probably more now, they don't use it as their main language, therefore it would still be considered a dead language. In fact, I will go a step further, and I will tell you a dead language is in fact a language that is no longer spoken by anyone as their first language. And generally speaking, this would be better exemplified as a population cluster, because of course if we just have a kid and some kind of crazy parent decides, hey, my kid is going to learn Latin, I'm going to lock them in a room and they will learn Latin until they're 8 and then I'll teach them another language, that kid would be a native speaker of Latin, but I'm not sure if that would be enough to be able to say now, since we have one, well, now it's not a dead language anymore. No, I think the only thing that would achieve is definitely charges, possibly life in jail for the parent. But do teach Latin to your kids, that's actually a good idea. Just don't lock them up in the chambers in the tower. Alright, so now that we have identified correctly what a dead language is, obviously the language that we are going to try and pinpoint today as the most ancient language ever is going to be a dead language. But which one is it? When is it from? And where is it from? And last but not least, do we really know? There are of course plenty of languages that are not in use anymore: Old Norse, Old English or Anglo-Saxon, Latin, Ancient Greek, Sumerian, Akkadian. Really, the list is extremely long, but as always we need to define correct parameters. How do we define oldest? Written evidence? Continuous tradition? Reconstructed origins? The first thing we need to consider is that languages are living, evolving systems. No language remains frozen over time. Modern languages are indeed descendants of older tongues, not identical to them, but they are definitely connected. So, should we really say that Latin is dead, or should we say that it's instead alive in its derivative forms, the Romance languages? Likewise, should we say that Old English is dead, or is it still alive in its newest form? It is interesting to say that even though of course we need to go deep into the history of mankind, there are some languages today that do show remarkable continuity of tradition. Look at Tamil in the Dravidian family, spoken for over 2,500 years continuously, with written records from at least 500 BC, still spoken by 80 million people today. Greek, continuous records from Mycenaean Greek from 1400 BC to today. Chinese, written tradition from Shang Dynasty, 1200 BC, to modern Mandarin, though heavily changed. Whenever we ask the question, what is the most ancient language, the answer will depend on 3 possible varieties or variations of this question. Do we mean the earliest written language that we have evidence for? Do we mean the longest continuous spoken tradition, or do we mean the oldest ancestor language? So the reality is that there is no single oldest language that we can easily identify before we set up parameters correctly. Because as I say, these parameters will define, remove, or add languages depending on how we set them. Now, given, we could be just asking, yeah, but what is the actual oldest prehistoric language at the very beginning of mankind that was used by the very first human? Then that's impossible to know. There is no way to go back that length of time and figure it out, at least for our current technology. In the future, who knows? Never say never. So let's instead focus on answers that we can get to questions that we can ask. The first written language sample that we have in history is Sumerian. Geographically speaking, this was a language spoken in southern Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, particularly in the region called Sumer, the city-states of Uruk, Lagash, Eridu, etc. The earliest evidence we have is from 3100 BC, with the invention of cuneiform writing. If you're enjoying this video so far, please take a moment to check out my Patreon page. With as little as a $5 support, you can help us ensure that we can continue to produce high quality and high researched content. And at the same time, you get access to polls, extra videos, unlisted streams, and much more. Thank you so much. Now, of course, this only indicates that that's when they started to write it. It doesn't mean that that's when they started to speak it, but it is indeed a language that is sophisticated enough to have a full written form used for legal reasons, organizational purposes, and governance. This is what really makes the Sumerian language one of the most fascinating subjects in the history of linguistics, because it represents humanity's first known written language and stands as a unique case, a fully documented tongue that eventually went extinct as a spoken medium, but survived for centuries as a scholarly and liturgical tradition. While the language's earliest documented evidence is around 3100 BC, with invention, as we said, of their writing system, the end of spoken use was about 2000 BC, when Sumerian ceased to be a community language, gradually replaced by Akkadian, which was a non-related language spoken in the north of Mesopotamia by the Akkadians, a Semitic people, hence a Semitic language. Sumerian instead being, as far as we know, a language isolate, meaning that it has no known relatives, with some possibility of connections proposed by some linguists to Dravidic languages. Sumerian provided the medium for humanity's first schools, where scribes were trained. Literature in Sumerian includes hymns, prayers, epic tales, legal codes, and proverbs. Its survival as a dead language studied by scribes laid the foundation for linguistic consciousness, the idea that languages can be learned, preserved, and used beyond their natural lifespan. And in its legacy, it influenced, up to a certain extent, Akkadian vocabulary and writing, and it was preserved as a prestige language for over a millennium after it ceased being spoken, a bit like Latin in Europe. When it comes to the second possible set of criteria, what is the longest continuous spoken tradition, then I would say we have at least three candidates: Tamil, Greek, or Chinese. And possibly the way we could sift through these candidates in order to choose one would be the amount of preservation or linguistic conservatism that we would find in these languages. Perhaps we could elect the most ancient language as a continuous tradition, the one that maintained its roots and tradition the most unaltered. Which one of these it is? You pick. Still, I do want to spend a little longer now on what I believe is the most interesting of the three sets of parameters, meaning what is the oldest ancestor language that we can trace with historical linguistics. And this is the point where we reach an interesting new category, that of proto-languages. So what is a proto-language? A hypothetical, undocumented parent language from which actual languages are derived. And once again, to get a second opinion, I guess, Merriam-Webster, proto-languages, an assumed or recorded ancestral language. So of course, when we say assumed, and then when we hear the word undocumented, we are not saying a wild guess. Proto-languages are basically a certainty, oftentimes lacking material goods or literary evidence, also because it's too old to even have literary evidence. It's an educated guess, so we have so much confirmation that we can see due to, for example, the way languages evolve or certain patterns, and we can trace all the way back, basically retro-engineering all the way back into a common sound or a common word. Let me give you an example of that. We have a lot of examples of proto-languages. We have Proto-Indo-European, Proto-Germanic, Proto-Slavic, but no one ever wrote them down. The way linguists can know that these existed with a surprising level of confidence is through a combination of comparative techniques, reconstruction, and supporting evidence. Linguists compared related languages, for example Latin, Greek, Sanskrit, and Gothic, and identify systematic correspondences in sounds, words, and grammar. Look at, for example, the Latin word for father, pater, Greek, pater, Sanskrit, Peter, and Gothic, father. All point to a reconstructed Proto-Indo-European form, which probably sounded fater or pater. The systematic nature of these correspondences allows scholars to reconstruct ancestral forms with high degrees of probability. In that respect, and having opened that window of perspective, then yes, not only we could say it's going to be one of the proto-languages, but most likely would be Proto-Indo-European. Was there something before that? It's very possible, but up to now, no way to know. Thank you for watching and joining Metatron's Academy. Bye. Proudly presenting the pendant of the noble one. Look at this beauty. Original custom design created by me in collaboration with Viking Jewelry. And it's my way to celebrate all of you, because as you know, I've been calling you noble ones for the last 12 years. Well, this is indeed the pendant of you, the noble ones, who are the custos veritatis, written here in Latin, and it means keeper of truth, because that's the only thing that matters. The truth, whether it offends them or not. So, available in both silver and bronze. I think my favorite is the bronze one, but they're both great. And this can be bought as a set, as we offer the original ring of the noble one, available in silver, bronze, and gold, the bracelet of the noble one, silent oath of truth, and a more low-profile version of the ring for those who prefer something a little thinner, which we offer also in bronze, silver, 14-karat gold, and 18-karat gold. Use the code NOBLE1 for a 15% discount at checkout, and massive thanks to each and every single one of you, and thank you to my haters for supporting my work.